Testing 1, 2, 3. Can you hear me okay?
Gotcha.
All right. So
set my microphone back here to the headset so we don't get too much echo in the audio.
Okay, and I'm going to close my blinds a little bit because it's making me really dark. So hold on.
There we go. Thank you, Yoshi, for setting that up for us. All right. And for those that are joining us out there in video land, please click twice on the slide presentation to maximize that screen so you can see the slides a little bit easier. Let me type that in there too.
All right, there we go. It's still a bright light in the back, but you know, it's not darkening the whole entire room at least. So.
There we are.
Yep, I can help. You know, I'll be on mute most of the time, but when people ask questions, like in between little pauses and stuff, then I can help read them for you and ask and stuff as well. So to help you along with the panel. And so.
I love that idea, Alan. Thanks so much.
You're quite welcome.
Yeah, I had more time the first time. Yep. Well, we'll see. I still see some folks jumping in. Welcome. We'll give another couple of seconds here, and then we'll get right into it. And yes, I've specifically grayed out a few of the topics that we covered during the first session. So we'll leave those slides there, but use that as an opportunity for our guests to ask some questions about them as we get through those various subjects. Hello, Quartz. Howdy, Walter. Okay, one more minute for folks to get into the room here. My clock on my computer says 1:29, but while I'm at it, let me go ahead and turn my timer on so I can see how long I've been yakking. This one has a lot of good information. Well, I won't judge on how good it is, but this one has a lot of information. So I want to make sure I don't run us over time by too many minutes. I do tend to get wordy when I get passionate about a subject, and I'm definitely passionate about foods and cooking. Hey, it's going well. Thank you. I'm glad to see you could join our advanced session. I hope you get some good things out of it there, Walter. Bing! I see 1:30. Time to move this on along here. So let me go over to click. So who do we have here? Well, you've got Burger Dragon Wolf up front, a gray muzzle furry that's been around the fandom since about 1992. And I'm an enthusiastic hobby cook, but not a real chef. I'm self-taught, learned a lot from online sources, old cooking shows like Graham Kerr, The Galloping Gourmet, Julia Child, Justin Wilson, and others, Bobby Flay, all kinds of folks out there. Pretty much self-taught. But I have a co-panelist with me here today. Alon the Cookie Dragon is on stage with me, and he'll be assisting and answering questions and keeping track of the audience chats and providing his expertise. Welcome, Alon. Say hi to our folks.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure that I can be here, and I'm really honored to know that there as well, too, because Verg does some amazing cooking as well, too. So I come from a culinary school and restaurant background myself, whether there. So, but I've learned a lot from the previous panel, you know, as well. So he has been an amazing Dragon Wolf, whether there, and I'm looking forward to learning more here as well, too. So, and helping to field some of the questions that you all might have out there.
Thank you very much and welcome aboard. I'm honored to share the stage with you, sir. So here's a quick rundown on things we're going to get to in this hour. A lot of it you saw from the beginning, but we're going to jump into greater depth, swim to the deeper end of the pool, as it were, or the hotter end of the kitchen, I guess. The gear, what do we need to do this? The process, how do we do this? The food, what do we do it to? And the weird, well, we're furries. It wouldn't be furries if we couldn't find something weird to do with it. So let's move right along here. Sous vide is the cheapest. Now, we brushed on this in the earlier one, but I wanted to bring it back up for those that missed the earlier channel. Yes, you don't have to have a lot of gear and a lot of money involved if you want to get started with sous vide and just to figure out what it can do. About the only thing you might have to purchase is the largest insulated foam cooler. You can boil water on the stove, get a good, highly accurate thermometer to test the water temperature, and use some of your plastic storage bags or canning jars to put the foods in. And you can do sous vide with only that. I don't recommend it because it's a little finicky and you got to kind of keep in touch with everything you're doing, make sure that the water stays at the right temperature. And fiddle with it. And sous vide is really a non-fiddling type of cooking technique. So this kind of goes against it. But if you just want to get your feet wet and you're not sure you want to spend anything, you're not sure that this technique is good for you, there's a good way to get started. Now, if you're a little more technically inclined and you have an old style stock pot or, slow cooker sitting around that doesn't have all the fancy timers and automation, one of those which is the switch that's low, medium, high, and off, you can find a sous vide controller on Amazon for around $30. You plug that into your electric outlet, you plug your crock pot into the outlet on the controller, and you dunk the thermostat in the water that you fill the crock pot with. Bingo, you have a sous vide machine. This is a sous vide water basin, one of the earlier types that they used to use back in the early 60s. It will work. I don't recommend it for eggs and other things that have highly critical temperature requirements because you're going to get some temperature excursions as it turns on and off, and the water gradually goes a little bit above and a little bit below your set point. But for most foods, and especially for vegetables, this will work exceedingly well. And you may have everything except that control already in your house. You need, if you want to up your game and really get into sous vide. Well, we talked about the circulators themselves. This is what you use to heat the water in the basin. Now, you can get two different types. There is the basin and the immersion circulators. We'll start with the circulators. Pretty much the home version is almost the same as the commercial type. The commercial type, surprisingly not, are larger, more powerful, and more reliable. As you can see from the illustration here, they have larger heating elements. Let me get my little pointer thing to work here. Boing. Laser pointer. There we go. You can see that circular heating element down in the bottom. They have bigger pumps. They have more controls for finer control, and they have higher wattages and larger sizes. This means that you can use a large basin of water to cook a large amount of ingredients, and you can do it every day of the week, every hour of the day without it breaking down. But basically what you see in these commercial style is exactly what you get in the home styles, only on a slightly smaller and much more economical scale. Next slide here, machine. Thank you, thank you. Bing, there we go. So we talked about what you need to look for in immersion circulators during the basic session. If you have any questions about what we discussed then, precision, performance, power, and price, the displays and the ease of using the various controls that they come with, the Wi-Fi, and whether or not Wi-Fi applications for your home cooker are a good idea. Let me brush on that again real quick. Some of these immersion circulators, such as the ANOVA one here, as you see, don't even have a control panel or a display. They're run exclusively by a smart device like a phone or a tablet. So if you want to cook, there are some distinct advantages to using this. You can download recipes. You can download times and temperature charts. You can set timers so that they go on and off at a special time, and you can monitor the status of your cooking away from your kitchen. All of those things are great advantages, but there are some disadvantages that you need to stay aware of. Hazard Wolf, you got it. You're going through the internet, which means if you're using the Wi-Fi version of these, some of them connect to websites that are in foreign countries. And your connection goes to that website. You choose what you want the appliance to do, and the website sends the commands to your appliance. Oh, well, if that website happens to go down and you have no assurance that that website is going to be there when you need it, if that website goes down, if you lose your internet connection, or if they decide that they're no longer going to support the device, you now own a brick. You don't do a lot of cooking with that. So yes, if you do have a web-enabled device, and there's nothing really wrong with them as long as you do your due diligence, I would strongly recommend that you get one that has a combination of these manual settings and controls along with the web features so that you can use both of them when you want to. Oh, by the way, there are some nefarious sites out there that are going to be happy to sample more than your cooking time and ingredients from your smart device, like your contact list. Hey, Varger just bought a brand new Sous Vide device. Let's send emails to everybody on his contact list telling him how much he likes this new Sous Vide device and see if they'll buy one too. Yeah, no, thank you. So what about these water ovens? Well, the original devices, pretty much industrial use, were all of these basin types. You didn't see too much of those immersion circulators. And they're still out on the market. Some of the disadvantages of those were they were very large. They take up a lot of space on your countertop. Some of the earlier ones, like this version, didn't have an easy way to fill or drain the device. So you had to wrestle a basin full of water and pour it into the sink when you were done. They do take up a lot of space, and they tend to be slightly more expensive. Some of them did not have circulation. So if you put a lot of pouches of food inside, you could get dead zones where the water wasn't circulating and your food wouldn't cook quite evenly. But there's some very nice ones that have showed up on the market in the last year. For example, this Cuisinart and this one down here underneath. You can find both of these on Amazon.com. They advantages here, this clear plastic part lifts away from the base. So you can pour it right out in a sink or stick it underneath the faucet to fill it up. You can see what your food is doing. You can see the racks, and both of these have circulation built in to keep those dead spots from happening. And the prices are pretty reasonable when you compare against the immersion circulators. An immersion circulator can run anywhere between about $50 to $300. These are right in that price point. So there's some advantages there. You don't have to get a separate basin. You don't have to get insulation to keep them warm so that they can cook for a long time without expending extra energy. They come with lids that you don't need to buy if you're using a pot or a basin. By the time you add all of those things up at the price of the basin or the stock pot itself, you will find that even though these prices could run a little bit higher than a circulator by itself, that the total price might even be less. So they're worth considering. Things to think about, as we just mentioned, the size and the counter space, filling and draining. As you see, those come with drains now. This top part lifts away so that you can pour it out easily. Circulation, yes, they have circulation built in now. So they're really making nice advances. In addition to those specially built water basin type circulators, they're making a lot of advances for things like slow cookers and multi-pots. And these are all now being designed. A lot of them on the market are being designed to include sous vide as part of their slow cooking or multi-pot functions. You can see within the list of things that this will do, sous vide is included on both of these. And the price are included with the price of your multiple service cooker. So for a multi-pot, you can steam, you could saute, you can pressure cook, and you can sous vide. Great advantage. One appliance does a lot of different things. In addition to that, you can do several of those things at the same time. So if you want to do the SEAR after you've done the sous vide, you could do that all in the same pot. If you want to sous vide an ingredient and then include it with some steamed rice or vegetables, you've got everything right there in one place. The same for your slow cooker. You want to do a slow cooked meal, take all day, come back after going out to work and find a pot of slow cooked food waiting for you for supper. Perfect. You want to do a sous vide in the same pot, you don't have to buy another appliance. So those are definitely worth considering, but they do have a couple of disadvantages you need to think of. Most of these do not have circulation. And for these multi-pot versions, the circular pots restrict the size of the ingredients in the pouches that you can put in there. So yes, they are very useful for a lot of things, but there are some disadvantages over a straight sous vide device as well. So you have to be aware of the trade-offs. But manufacturers have taken that into account. And now you have integrated all-in-one specializing in sous vide devices. For instance, this one by Zing has thermometers built into the lid, as well as the one that's built into the base of the multi-pot. So when you close the lid, that thermometer, when you set it to sous vide mode, is immersed in the liquid to make sure that the temperatures of the liquid are more stable. In addition to doing all the other little multi-pot tricks, and it circulates. And you have sous vide or multi-systems like this one that start with an induction base to provide the heating power, which you can put any sort of food utensil on top of that'll work with an induction cooker, like a cast iron pan. But they also have sous vide basins that you can attach to the base with additional thermocouples inside that report back to the base to make sure that the water stays at stable temperatures. They have steaming inserts. You can use them as stock pots and large version steamers as well. And they're coming out with additional tops that they're going to be adding for things like deep frying. So yes, these are also options out there on the market now to consider and might be worthwhile if you want one device to do multiple purposes. So let's talk about exit the air. Now, in the beginning course, we talked about bag sealers and chamber sealers. So we'll get a little bit more into those. And we have the Archimedes immersion technique. Let me talk about that real quick because, hey, I'm still using it. I have yet to put a bag sealer for most of my cooking. You take a standard storage bag, you dip it in a basin of water or your kitchen sink. You let that water push the bag up against your cooking ingredient. It conforms to all the nooks and crannies of your cooking ingredient, and it gradually pushes the air out. You just lower the bag down towards the surface of the water. Make sure you don't go too low and let water in the top. Once you have it fairly close to the top of the water, zip that bag up, and you've created a vacuum pack. You can use this for other things in storage in your freezer, for example. Just dry the outside of the bag off, and you have less worries about freezer burn because you pushed all the air out. It works for more than sous vide, but it's a good technique to know. So what about bag sealers? Now, most folks are fairly familiar with the countertop seal-a-meal style bag sealers. We mentioned some of the disadvantages in the basic course. That is, you can see here that these bags have grooves built onto the inside. Those are specialty items. The grooves are there to make sure that the vacuum pump that's inside of this countertop unit can suck the air around the edges of the ingredient and from the bottom of the pouch. That means these bags are a little higher priced than just a plain plastic bag that you could use in the chamber style sealers. They run about 25 cents a foot, where a chamber style bag is about 3 cents a foot. So there are significant differences, but they're convenient, they're inexpensive, and you can put them up in a shelf or in a drawer. They're also a little bit of a hazard if you're going to be sealing foods with a lot of liquid in, because just like sucking a milkshake through a straw, you can suck the milk, you can suck the liquids up into the vacuum pump. Your vacuum pump will not like that. It will quit working. So be very careful with that type of ingredient, but get around that by freezing your ingredients before you put them in the bag. The sous vide won't care. It will work very well with frozen ingredients as well as thawed out and ready to cook ingredients. And that'll keep you from sucking up the liquids. You can also get these portable varieties, both manual, electrical, and battery powered. They take specialty bags that have little ports, one-way valves on the edge of the bag. You go ahead and you put your ingredients inside the bag, you seal them up, and then you apply the vacuum to that little hole. The nice thing is that you don't have these big old devices that you need to worry about. They work when the power goes out. They work out at campsites as well. So you can put stuff in a bag and put them in a pot of water over a campfire. The disadvantage is, these are specialty bags. You can wash them out and reuse them, but they're a lot more expensive than even the countertop food saver bags. So they work, but be prepared to provide a little bit more money in order to get these bag sets. And the bags are a fixed size. So if your ingredient doesn't fit in the bag, you're not going to be cooking it. The countertop unit, you can cut these bags to just about any length that you want. So you can put very large portions as long as they fit in your pot. Chamber sealers. Wonderful devices, expensive, heavy, cumbersome, wonderful devices. Oh, yes, Alan, you're right. You can suck the air out of the bag with a straw. I have done it before. I recommend being very cautious when you do it, because I've been sucking the air out of a bag full of steaks and got a wonderful mouthful of steak juice before it cooked. Now, I'm a bit of a carnivore, but drinking steak shakes was not something that I wanted to do that day. It's very rare. But yes, you could do that too. It does work. Chamber cookers or chamber vacuums, wonderful devices. You can change the vacuum levels on these things so you don't squish your vacuum-packed object down into a little bitty pancake when it's a tender object. For instance, a crab patty or tuna patty or something like that, a very tender piece of fish. Yes, they are wonderful for a lot of things. They don't care a whit about liquids. In fact, if you're trying to take the bubbles out of something like gelatin so that it's perfectly clear and bubble free, you can take a tray, pour your gelatin in it, sit that tray down in the vacuum chamber, close the lid up, pull a vacuum and release it. Hey, no bubbles. So it does work for that, and it works very well. You can also use these for fast marinades. You put your ingredient in the bag, you put them in there, you pull a vacuum on it, and then you release the vacuum. You put the marinade in the bag with that ingredient before you pull the vacuum, and when you pull the vacuum, it opens the pores on the ingredients. And when you release the vacuum, all of your marinade has gone into the food. So you don't have to leave it sit in the refrigerator for hours or overnight. Wonderful, cool stuff that they can do. but they're not cheap. And some of them, like this model on the left, have oil-filled pumps that let them pull a stronger vacuum, which means you have to do maintenance on the oil. So be advised, that's a consideration if you're looking into that sort of an item. Now, we talked about searing devices. If you're into sous vide, you are going to sear. Sous vide will poach your foods in the envelope. What comes out looks like a poached chicken breast or poached fish. It's beautiful if that's what you want. However, if you want a poached steak, you're not going to find a lot of people that are going to like a nice gray piece of meat on their plate. You're going to want to put a sear on it. You're going to want to put a sear on your burgers, on your chicken, on a lot of the other items that come out to get that lovely Maillard flavors off the surface. Sous vide is not going to do that for you. You're going to have to do that afterwards. What do the sous vide cooks like to use? Torches, skillets, infrared broilers, and charcoal chimneys. A lot of people consider using their barbecue grill to put the sear on the ingredient once you've taken it out. I recommend not. A barbecue grill is great for grilling, but it really doesn't get the ultra high temperatures that you want to get a good sear on the outside of your ingredients without continuing the cooking. And you've already cooked it to the point that you wanted it to be. So you don't want to cook it any further. So you want a very high, direct temperature in order to get the best sear. So gas and pellet and charcoal grills, good for smoking. And oh, by the way, put them over indirect heat on a gas or pellet or smoker and smoke your food. For example, let's take some ribs. Smoke your ribs for an hour to 3 hours over low heat, where you're not cooking them, you're just infusing them with that wonderful smoke ring and flavor. Take them out and then put that into your sous vide. You will get incredible results that way. You can make certain that your ribs are cooked exactly to the point that you want. Do you want a little bit of tooth to cling lightly to the bones? Or do you want to be able to just pull the bone clean from the meat and have it fall off the bone tender? You change the temperature by 5 degrees and you can get one result or the other, but you know exactly what you're going to get out. Once you've taken it out of the sous vide bag, save all those juices. Make a barbecue sauce or a glaze from it. Use your torch, paint it with that glaze, sear that torch and caramelize it to the surface. Holy smoke, have you got good eats. And it's assured every time. You don't have to worry about the meat stalling out in the smoker. You don't have to worry about 6, 8, 10 hours in the smoker to do the cook. You've got it right there, and you have total control and total precision. So searing torches. We talked about these also in the basic course. Your standard butane torch works really well. Your shop Bernzomatic propane and butane torches, they also work, but make sure that you put a flame spreader on this nozzle because the high temperatures will burn your meat, not sear it. But you can get one that looks a little bit like a shoehorn that fits over the front. The flame splashes over that nozzle and fans out into a fan shape. That works really well. The Searsol also is a very well-known appliance in sous vide circles, but it's a little expensive. And that grid on the front tends to burn away after long uses. We're talking months. But it does a very good job while it's working. You can also get a specialty built torch like this one, the Sous Vide gun, and you can find him online. Folks call that the flamethrower. You can hook this to your barbecue tank, or you can put those little green portable tanks that you use for the smaller cookers on it. It provides a wonderful flame. Whenever you're using a torch, though, make sure you're not right up next to the nozzle because it's still combining fuel with the air right there. And you're going to get fuel flavors on your ingredients. That is not good eats. But this area out here will put a good sear on the meat And folks have done side-by-side blind comparisons between that and other searing methods and really have been unable to tell the difference. It's very, very subtle, if at all. Other options, good old skillets. I'm sure if you have a kitchen, you've got skillets inside. Make sure you're using a non-reactive, non-stick. Avoid your non-stick skillets. Cast iron and good old-fashioned carbon steel are the best bets for a skillet. Those things will transmit the heat cleanly into your food. You can get them screaming hot without damaging the coatings, without giving off gases that these nonstick coatings will emit if they get too hot. They will transfer the energy into the food quickly so you get a good surface sear without cooking into the middle of the stuff that you'd already prepared. Bing! And infrared broilers. Now, this is going to need a bit of a budget. These little guys don't come cheap, but they are beasts when it comes to putting out heat. These infrared broilers, often called salamanders in the cooking business, will get up to 1,500, 1,600, 1,800 degrees. They sear, and they sear well. You can get them that will attach to the side of your charcoal grills, or you can get some grills that have them already affixed. You can get standalone units that plug in or that work under fuel like propane or natural gas. The standalone units frequently need professional installation or have to be installed outside because they have to be vented and they're burning fuel. Those that are installed inside and electrical often run on 220 or 440, the higher multi-phase voltages, and need a professional installation for the electric outlet. They don't plug into a standard wall socket in most cases. So while they do a great job, you need to do your research on them. And most of them are a little bit pricey, but boy, they cook well. Now, something your grillers might already have is a barbecue charcoal starter. These charcoal chimneys can run anywhere from $100 down to $20 or $30. They all do a great job. The more expensive ones have fans that will do forced air cooking, really get a blaze started inside of it. They put a heck of a sear on top of your food. The only disadvantage really is most of them aren't that large of a cooking surface. So if you're searing a lot of different things, you'll have to do it in stages. If you are going to use one of these, avoid the use of rapid start charcoal because it's usually infused with charcoal fluid, starter fluid, to get it started. And if you do use it, you want to make sure that it is thoroughly ignited and all of the coals are covered with that white ash to make sure that that fuel has burnt away completely. And if you do use one of these, don't substitute your cooling rack from your kitchen that you put your cakes on when you take it out of the oven for a real charcoal grill on top, because they get hot enough to melt one of them. You do not want to melt your cooling rack onto the side of an expensive steak and ruin your supper. Trust me there. But these work quite well. So that everything else. Well, what other gear is everything else? We covered most of the basics. Yep. But what about thermometers, basins, clips, covers, insulations, and smoking? And for those people coming from the marijuana states, no, I'm not talking about that kind of smoking. Thermometers, a good kitchen instant read thermometer is a great asset when you're doing sous vide. You can check and verify the temperature of your water. You can use floating types, or you can use the handheld instant reads. Floating types will give you a constant reading. It's not really important once you are sure that your circulator or your basin is maintaining a good temperature, but it's good at the start if you're checking up on that kind of thing. The instant read thermometers are excellent if you're using zip type bags, because you can lift the bag out, unzip it, check the temperature of your ingredient, and then submerge it using the Archimedes principle or a straw and zip it back up and continue cooking if you need to. Do not poke these through the side of a sealed bag because you'll let the water in. And we've already talked about the temperature controller. So how about pots and pans? Yes, you can use a regular stock pot. Steel or aluminum both work really well. If you're using one of the stock pots from your kitchen, well, a couple of things to consider. These little cookers can be fairly decent size. They also have minimum and maximum water level markings on this side of the cooker. So some of these little cookers, if you put them in a pot that deep, the water is going to come all the way up to here. Or they're going to be dangling on the side of the pot, and the bottom, they're going to be several inches from the bottom of the pot, which can affect the way the water circulates. The pots are good, but they do make tailored sous vide pots for just that reason, that make sure that they're within the water levels of the various cookers. They're not going to be too shallow or too deep, and they're going to do a decent job. And a lot of them will come with a silicone style lid in addition to the regular pot lid, so that you can cover the pot up when you're doing a long cook and reduce the evaporation. In addition, when you're considering a stock pot, make sure the diameter is large enough so that when you put your cooker in there, you're not crowding the ingredients that you're going to be putting in the pot with it. But a good old-fashioned kitchen stock pot works a treat. It works really well. You can also get industrial totes, what some of the kitchen staff call Cambros, because one of the manufacturers that makes them. These things work really well as well, and they're frequently less expensive than the specially tailored sous vide versions, because you're buying something with kind of the sous vide brand name. The Cambros are wonderful, but watch when you get those. Like a stock pot, they come in different depths. So make sure that you're getting one that's going to be deep enough to reach the minimum level on your immersion circulator and still have room to put your ingredients in it. Also, the Cambros tend to be square, although you can get rectangular ones similar to this. The square ones are nice. You put your circulator in the corner, but because they're square, they do tend to limit the size that you have to put the space that you have to put your ingredients in. So kind of watch for that. They get taller as well as wider. The tailored sous vide basins tend to be more rectangular. You put your circulator at one end, and when you go up in size between a 6-quart or an 8-quart or 12-quart, they get a little bit wider, but they get longer instead, which allows you more room to put more pouches of ingredients inside. A lot of them will come with a lid that already has a cutout for your particular circulator. Make sure you get the lid that fits your circulator, because they come in different sizes. Some of them are considerably wider than others. And if you got one of the wide ones with a narrow lid, you're going to be very upset. There are some specialty size of shaped sous vide containers out there, like this one by Innova. I would recommend against getting one of those. They look really nice, but you won't be able to find any special. Well, let's put it this way. It's like buying a printer that takes specialty ink. If you want to get an insulator to put around the outside, if you've broken the lid and you need to get a new lid, if you want to get anything that fits, you're going to have to buy it from them, because they have a special shape and only theirs fits. So that is something to be considerate of. Other things you might want. How about racks, clips, weights, and magnets? Yes, you will really want to get a rack eventually. It's great for separating the different things you're cooking. It keeps them all evenly separated so that the water circulates well between everything. It keeps things from bobbing up to the surface. It holds them in one place so they don't float around as the water circulates. They're very, very useful. You can get them in metal, you can get them in plastic, you can get them to fold up and disassemble for easy packing and storage. Clips, you can get specialty version Sous Vide clips, or you can buy bulldog style clips from your stationery store. Just make sure you get stainless steel or non-corrosive types so that they don't get affected by the water. You can use those to clip your pouches to the side of your basins or the side of your stock pot so they don't float around. You can get weights that will help keep your food from bobbing up to the surface. You can also simply put a plate or a pot lid on top if you want to go on the cheap. These magnets are a really nice idea, especially these coated ones like this Cobra here. They can clip on either side of a pouch to weight the pouch down, or if you have a steel pot, you can take one of these and you can use it like a clip to attach your pouch to the side of the pot. Really useful. However, they're a little bit expensive because they're built specifically for sous vide. You can also get ceramic and coated neodymium, that's easier for me to say. No, it's not. Neodymium magnets that have coatings on it that will work just like those. You do need to be a little cautious with these. Most of those magnets are very powerful. They will pull more than 20 pounds of attraction between two of the magnets. So once you have them stuck together, they can be very hard to unstick. The trick with one of those, by the way, is slide them apart against each other. Slide one of them off to the side to the point where then you can pry it easily away. If you try to pull it straight away from its sister attachments, they'll slip out of your paws and they'll clamp together and they will pinch like a mother. And yeah, ask me how I know. But make sure you get the coated versions because the coated versions protect the magnetic material underneath from attack by the water and being degraded. Yes, absolutely. It was a learning experience, one that I do not want to repeat. But these coated ones work very well. Be advised, though, all magnets lose strength as their temperature increases. So you want to get fairly strong ones to start out with so that when you run a temperature up to 180, 190 degrees, they still have enough attraction left to be effective. Basins, covers, and insulations. Yes, if you're going to be cooking for more than an hour, I highly recommend you cover the pot. You could do it with a little tin foil with some food wrap, plastic wrap, or you can get specialty covers. You can get plastic all-in-one covers. Sometimes the basins will come with them. You can get versions that have hinges so that you can leave the sous vide machine down in there while you're in there inspecting, adding, or removing food. You can get flexible silicone ones that will fit over top of a pot or a basin. And you can also get these really weird little ping pong ball looking things. They're actually smaller and more rugged than ping pong balls, but they work pretty much the same way. You pour them over top of the liquid, and they not only prevent evaporation, but they'll insulate the top to keep some of the temperature inside as well. Along with the ping pong balls, you can also find specially insulated sleeves that will fit around standard Cambros or Rubbermaid totes and other things. These are really good for keeping the temperature in the water when you're doing an extended cook for 8, 10, 12, 24, 48 hours. They will reduce the amount of energy and the amount of water loss from your cooking if you're using one of these. However, if you want to save some money, find some newspapers. It looks a little ghetto, but find some newspapers, wrap a few layers of newspaper around the outside of your cooking basin or pot, and tie it in place with some kitchen twine. Works a treat as well, but it does look pretty low quality, although it does work. Smoking guns. We mentioned you can't get good grill and smoke flavor out of a sous vide. Not really, but you can add it afterward. These little smoking guns have a fan and electrical source, little batteries in there, and a smoke chamber. You fill your smoke chamber with little mini wood chips that can come in all kinds of different flavors like apple wood, cherry wood, hickory, mesquite, whatever you like. You fire that up with a little kitchen torch and you hook up your hose to it, and the fan blows a cloud of smoke down that hose. You can put that hose underneath one of these domes. They call them cloches, if I'm pronouncing that right, Elon. A cloche, a cloche. They make a wonderful presentation, by the way, when you take one of those over a tray to the table and set it in front of a diner and lift it, and that smoke wafts out from underneath and reveals the food under there. It's pretty spectacular. However, they're not exactly cheap, and you can get specialty ones that have little ports, or you can simply stuck the hose underneath the side of it and not much smoke will escape because those hoses are very small. You can also just take your sous vide pouch. If you're using a Ziploc, you unzip a little bit and you stick the hose in the edge and you pump it full of smoke and you seal it back up. It does a wonderful job of infusing smoke into the food. If you don't want to use either one of those, you can put it in just a regular casserole dish or baking tray. Put a few layers of plastic wrap or tin foil. Remember, it's only smoke. It's not hot. You stick your hose in that. You fill the tray up with smoke and you seal the edge. I do recommend that if you're using one of these, they pump out a lot of smoke. So if you have a smoke alarm in your house that's situated fairly close to the kitchen, you might want to temporarily disconnect it if you don't like the sound of shrilling alarms in your ears. Food safety. Now, a lot of the stuff that we're about to discuss came from this book, Douglas Baldwin's Sous Vide for the Home Cook. You can buy it at Amazon.com, but he has the whole book on a website right here. It's a wonderful resource. It's got recipes, it's got tables, it's got scientific explanations for everything that's going on under temperature, time, proteins, pathogens, the whole works. Wonderful information. I strongly recommend that you take a look at that if you want to get involved in more advanced sous vide. We talked about some of the safety factors. Yep, absolutely safe. BPAs or bisphenol A. You find it in a lot of polycarbonate and epoxy resins, water bottles, tin can linings. A lot of poly items have the BPAs in them. Heat causes the BPAs to be leached from these items. Don't use them for cooking in sous vide. Use BPA-free plastics, glass, or metal. Every name brand food storage bag is safe for sous vide cooking. They've all been FDA approved for microwave cooking, so they definitely work in sous vide. But keep the temperatures low. You don't want to go over 195 degrees or they'll start unsealing. Short cook times. The food will pasteurize in a sous vide, and that's about what we're about to talk about. But short cook times at lower temperatures don't allow the center of mass to stay at pasteurization temperatures long enough. If you're going to cook some of those, and I do recommend, some of those are pretty tasty, but if you're going to cook some of those, make sure you eat them. Don't let them rest. And don't store them. If you're going to store them, make sure you keep the center temperatures at that safe point long enough to kill the pathogens before you store them. So rise to core temperatures. Not only do you have to reach a good core temperature, but you got to give it enough time for the core to reach that temperature. We talked about advanced concepts. Well, let me lay you some advanced words here. progress is inverse to the temperature differential between the bath and ingredients, and the total time increases by the quadratic of the thickness. Woo! That's college level sentence right there. What we're talking about is basically as you get closer to the set point, as you get closer to the temperature of the water, it takes more and more time for your core to reach that difference. So you can see on this graph, we went all the way up to 52 degrees in just 52 degrees Celsius, 126 degrees Fahrenheit, in just about 30 minutes. It took another 30 minutes to reach 54 degrees. That's because the water was at 133 degrees and 54 degrees. It needed that much to make that little bit of difference. So that's your temperature differential part. The quadratic of the thickness means that basically when the thickness doubles, it takes 4 times the time to achieve the same internal core temperature. So what does it mean in reality? Well, here's a little table that'll show you what happens for equilibrium versus the thickness of meat. So a big 3-inch thick steak coming from a freezer cylinder is going to take 5 hours to reach equilibrium all the way through the meat. It doesn't matter what the temperature of the water is. That could be 150, that could be 130. It still takes 5 hours to get there. Fish takes a little bit less, and a cylinder versus a slab takes a little difference as well. Surprisingly, the slab tends to take longer. But you need to allow enough time for your center temperature to reach equilibrium, and then it has to stay there long enough for the pasteurization to take effect. And pasteurization takes longer depending on the lowness or the temperature that you're reaching. Higher temperatures kill pathogens faster. So at 131 degrees, it's going to take about an hour and a half to do a 6-fold reduction in the number of pathogens. At 145 degrees, it only takes 5 minutes. So when you see these food safety temperatures that say you got to get to 165 degrees, they're saying that because once you see that temperature, you're normally tempted as a cook to say, oh, I've got 165 degrees, whip it off of the gas, take it off the stove, set it on the plate, and get ready to cook it. Well, 165 degrees, it only needs to stay there 2 seconds. So if you whip it right out of the skillet and put it on the plate, you've still achieved pasteurization. But with sous vide, let's say you like a nice medium rare, closer to the rare side steak. That's around 133, 134 degrees. Great. Keep it there an hour. Allow it enough time to come to equilibrium, and then allow it to sit there for an hour. You achieve the same level of pasteurization as you did if you got it to 165 degrees and took it right off the heat. You're just as safe. But now you have food at a temperature that you want to eat. And if you're cooking chicken to 165 degrees breast meat, you have shoe leather. It is really dry and nasty. If you're cooking it to 145 degrees breast meat, it is tender, it is juicy, it is succulent, and it only needs that much time to be just as safe. So total pasteurization, this includes the rise time, the equilibrium time, as well as the set time. And this is just a chart so that you can see what the different times and temperatures versus the different thicknesses are. You can buy this, by the way, from Amazing Foods Made Easy. It's called the Sous Vide Timing Ruler. Comes in a nice laminated front and back that you can keep right next to your sous vide cooker. You can wipe off and you splash stuff on it. And it's a handy reference to have right at your paws so that you know exactly what you're cooking and how long you need to cook it and what the safety limits are. The process. We're going to talk a little bit about alcohols, fats, and herbs and getting buoyant because we covered most of the others in the basic class. So please, if you have any questions there on any of those basic items, go ahead and chime up. But reduce the alcohols, first thing I want to mention. If you're going to cook with alcohol in the pouch, and oh, by the way, I recommend it. It brings some fantastic flavors from whiskeys, wines, and various other ingredients. Reduce the alcohol first. And by that, I mean use an alcohol reduction. Cook it. Drive the alcohol off. If you drive the alcohol off, you keep the flavoring ingredients remaining, and you can use that. If you put the raw alcohol in the bag, frequently that raw alcohol flavor overpowers the food and gives it a rather bitter, pungent flavor. And you taste the alcohol and not the wine and not the food.
Virg, we did have a quick question from Clinton C.
Yes, sir.
And I wanted to, and I figure you can answer it, or I can answer it as well. His
Sure.
question was, he understands that these times are minimums, but how long can the food be held at these temperatures and still remain safe and or palatable?
Oh,
Could he
excellent.
keep the chicken going for 8 hours at 145?
Absolutely. You certainly can. However, 8 hours at 145 is going to start making texture changes to your chicken. What you can do is once your chicken has cooked to its intended point, for example, 145 degrees, you could leave it sit there up to, say, 4 hours and not see any noticeable difference. 5 hours, you might be able to detect slight differences in the texture, which will increase as long as you hold it at 145. But you can reduce that temperature to a holding temperature of 131. Those changes will immediately reduce in action. They will still happen, but they'll take much longer to happen. And you can hold it there for 8 hours and see no difference at all. So yes, you can certainly do that, and it works quite well. Yes, as a matter of fact, that's a very good use for it there, Clinton. Yes, you can put things in a sous vide bath. You can cook them and then drop the temperature down or allow them to. Now, meat, especially pork and beef, they're a little more resilient. They'll sit for 8 hours with barely any textural noticeable changes. Because chicken is a little bit more delicate than pork or beef, you start to notice the changes a little bit faster. But yes, a sous vide can stay at its cooked temperature for a long time without any major degradation. In fact, it's one of the techniques for tenderizing chicken, poultry, beef, and pork is you can hold it at a cooked temperature. The proteins begin to denature slightly. The collagens liquefy and float out into the meat and infuse the meat with that gelatin. In addition, the fats and stuff infuse the meat at the same time. So you can take a fairly tough top loin or chuck roast, put them in sous vide and allow them to stay in the bag for 48 hours. And those denaturing collagen reduction techniques start happening. And by the time you take it out, it still has all of the flavor of that robust, beefy chuck roast, but it's almost as tender as a filet mignon. So, yep, it's one of the things that I did when I made my individual filet mignons on the cheap. I used chuck roast, the 48-hour cook, took them out, seared them, added mushrooms and garlic and oils to them, and wrapped them in a pastry and baked them. They were incredible. I would strongly recommend that technique to everybody. Fresh versus dried herbs, we kind of covered that. Yes, dried herbs are generally more reliable in a sous vide than the fresh herbs. Fresh herbs will change flavors somewhat. You need to practice with different herbs and find out what those changes are and if you like them, because each one reacts a little bit differently. Thyme, rosemary, tarragon and dill tend to be fairly stable when fresh, although they do still give different results in dried. Getting buoyant. Onions, by the way, when you cook them at high enough temperatures over about 150 degrees on up to about 180, they start giving off gas. I strongly recommend, if you're going to put onions in a sous vide, that you use a zip top style pouch instead of a vacuum pack one. What can we cook? We kind of covered these when we were talking earlier. Roulades, custards, yogurts, ricotta cheese, flavored oils, and alcohols. Oops, Steve. What about Steve? Did I miss somebody? In any case, flavored oils, syrups, and alcohols. Now, I know a lot of folks have heard about infusing alcohols with other flavors like limoncello or orangecello. How about making bacon-infused bourbon? Most of those types of infusions, whether you're doing oils or alcohols, take days or weeks. You put a little bit of herb. A lot of people have seen those around Christmas times, bottles of good olive oil with all kinds of herbs and peppers and things floating in there to infuse the olive oils with those flavors. Usually, if you're doing that at home, it's going to take days or weeks in order to make those kinds of infusions. You can do that in a sous vide at about 135 to 140 degrees for a half an hour to 2 hours, depending on how much flavor you want to put in there. Custards, pot de creams, puddings, curds, things that require very careful cooking over things like a bain-marie or a double boiler, because you don't want to scramble your eggs. You can set the exact temperatures you want. You can make a pot de creme in a pot, in a cookie, little bitty home canning jelly jar, and you can make the pot de cremes right in the sous vide in the jar. You can do yogurt. You can create ricotta cheese. You can make quicker pickles because you can warm the sous vide pickle a little bit. So instead of pickling for 24 or 48 hours, you can get results in a half an hour. We did mention pasteurizing eggs. We'll touch on it again. 131 degrees for 2 hours, and eggs are pasteurized, perfectly safe to eat, and salmonella free, and they work just the same as the raw egg did. We pretty well covered beef and pork, but here's a picture to show a little bit more about what the different temperatures will do to meat, depending on what you cook them to. And what happens if you leave them in the water? We're talking about tenderizing and things. There's virtually no difference between 1 hour and 4 hours. 4 hours to 6 hours, almost the same. But once you get up to 24 hours, they begin becoming more and more tender. However, temperature has a much larger impact. 120 degrees to 160 degrees, the same weight of meat. That's the difference in the amount of juices that the meat gives up. So we were talking about nice, juicy meat. Well, if all of that juice is coming out of the same piece of meat, it's certainly going to be a lot drier than if you cooked it at 140 degrees. Poultry, we covered pretty well the same during the basic course, but please, if you have any questions about it, here's some differences in appearance when poultry is cooked to different temperatures. 160 degrees, it's starting to dry out pretty well, but it still hasn't gotten to that shoe leather state. 150 degrees to 145. I like mine about 145 to 150. It's still nice and juicy. It's a little waxy down in here at the 140, but it's incredibly tender. But I like a little bit more texture. 150 degrees for chicken breast. 145 is about where I want it. 150 to 155 for dark meat. And it works very well in sous vide. Once again, expressing water or expressing the juices from the chicken, just 10 degrees makes that much difference in how much juice that you're going to take away from the meat. Fish and seafood, You notice here, now we've been talking 130 to 160 degrees for finish temperature. This is salmon, and we're stopping at 130. So the temperatures are much lower. Fish is much more delicate for the most part, and cooking. It's particularly useful, but you need to be careful what kind of fish you're going to be cooking in sous vide. Tuna, farmed salmon, swordfish, just about every freshwater fish, you can pretty well eat that raw. It's going to be good no matter what temperature you cook it at sous vide. You're just looking for your desired juiciness, flakiness, and amount of doneness. However, wild salmon, halibut, cod, and sea bass and inshore saltwater fish can frequently have these little worms called nematodes in them. If you are getting those raw, sous vide at 130 degrees is not hot enough to do away with them. If you're going to want to eat that particular type of fish, I strongly recommend that you use flash frozen commercial fish. The flash frozen, they freeze it right on board the boat. It's just as tasty and fresh as if it came right out of the water, but it kills all those little worms, all those little nematodes, and it's safe to cook and eat at any temperature. Shellfish, squid, and octopus. Yes, you can do those in sous vide, and they are delicious. Above 140 degrees, your shrimp starts to become kind of tough and rubbery, but you probably want to stop at about 30 minutes, although you can go up to an hour. Some shrimp will begin to get mushy when you start cooking it up to an hour. Here's a quick tip. Toss your shrimp with a little bit of baking soda, about a half a teaspoon per pound, and let it sit in that baking soda. Stir it all around. Let it sit in the fridge for about 30 minutes before you put it in a sous vide vase. Rinse it off, pat it dry, and put it in your sous vide. It'll come out noticeably plumper and firmer by changing the pH that little bit once you cook it. Oh, by the way, that works on the stovetop too. So, octopus. Octopus. There we go. Octopus, scallops, lobsters, and squid. There's some temperatures and some times to be considered of. Octopus is a weird beast. You notice most of these other ones, we're going to talk about higher temperatures getting more firm, a little bit tougher. Octopus goes the other way. As you cook it higher temperature, it gets more tender. It's a strange one, but all of them work very, very well in sous vide. The only difference we have in here is pre-sear versus eat it directly out of the sous vide. If you're going to be searing things like scallops, and if you're doing, sea scallops with the large scallops, you really want to put a sear on those. Don't cook them all the way in the sous vide. They are tender enough that if you cook them to the right doneness in sous vide, and for some reason my scallops are backwards. But if you cook them to the right doneness, I've got temperature C and temperature F reversed on that. Sorry about that, folks. If you cook them to the right doneness in scallops, 122 degrees before you sear it, because you're going to cook further. If you cook them to 131, you're going to overcook them a little bit when you put the sear on it. It does the same thing when you do the squid. You want to cook it a little bit low, because when you sear it, you're going to cook it a little bit further, and squid is delicate enough. There's no way to really put a sear without adding to the cooking time. Veggies and fruits. Veggies cook really well at about 190 degrees for 20 minutes. You can shorten the cook time by taking the temperature up to about 195 degrees, but be very careful, because you're reaching the point where you're going to weaken the plastic bags. Note, there's no evaporation, so that means your potatoes taste more potato-y, and asparagus tastes more asparagus-y. Yeah, it sounds like Willy Wonka. It allows you to cook green vegetables and stuff until they are crisp, tender, but the hue and the colors stay just as vibrant as when they were fresh. Root vegetables will also cook very well. Most veggies you can cook anywhere between 175 to 195 degrees, although 190 to 185 is the most common. Starchy vegetables like russet potatoes, you can bring them down to about 185 if you're making palm puree. And I'm sure Alon knows what those are. Ooh, those are the most luxurious potatoes you've ever tasted. That's kind of butter with a little bit of potato mixed in. You mix that butter and that cream in the bag with those potatoes, you cook them, and then you run them through a food mill. You have amazing palm puree, and it's just one step. Eggs, loose whites, tight whites, and yolks. All of these have different levels of protein, different structures, different amount of moistures. They all take a set at different temperatures, and they are one of the most difficult little beggars to get cooked right, no matter what way you try to cook them. The problem is with most eggs, when you boil these, the loose whites tend to set last. The tight whites tend to set first, and the yolks are somewhere in the middle. Now, when you're boiling them or steaming them, that works really well because these loose whites are right next to the shell and they're getting the highest heats, and they'll tighten up real quick. And then as the heat migrates further in, the tight whites begin tightening up and setting, and finally heat starts reaching the yolk, which means it's not that difficult in order to get a nice, soft, boiled, egg with a creamy yolk. But it's all really dependent on the timing. Sous vide, we tend to depend more on the temperature and the precision. So when we're cooking eggs, we're looking for temperatures and the entire egg reaching equilibrium. Now, we did mention pasteurizing eggs. You can see here at 136 degrees, the egg whites have just barely begun to turn cloudy. At 131, they haven't even changed by this much. So this is what I was saying. You can pasteurize your eggs at 131 degrees and see virtually no difference in what the result is. You can use them just like raw eggs. Depending on where you want to go, you can have nice gelatinous eggs, creamy running middles, semi-firm to firm, hard-boiled eggs. But look at your temperature differences. 152, your egg yolks are kind of jelly. 155, they've begun to set to the point where they make wonderful deviled and egg salad dishes. 150 degrees, there's still just barely a little bit running. So it only takes a matter of 2 degrees to make a difference in your result. And because they're equilibrium, this set is all the way through the egg. The egg white is no different from the egg yolk. It's taken its set because they're all at the same temperature. So it gives you a much more refined texture all the way across the egg. Some people prefer them that way. Other people like the more traditional where the whites are set a little bit harder than the yolks. You can do that by a couple of hybrid techniques. One, you set your cooking temperatures up a little bit higher, about 155, 160, and then you cook by time and not by temperature. Or you set your temperatures to what you want the yolks to be, and then you remove the eggs and boil them for just a few seconds to get that outer layer a little more solid in the way you want, and then immediately remove them to an ice bath. Eggs are something that you can spend a lot of time playing with to get exactly the right technique that suits you. But for me, my favorite way to do eggs in a sous vide are egg bites. And here's a quick recipe for you. Egg bites, you make a mixture like this. Eggs, cream, cottage cheese, cream cheese, a little bit of flavor. I used Penzeys Muriel to flavor, but you can use any sort of like Mrs. Dash or similar seasonings, a little bit of salt and black pepper. You whip all of this together with an immersion blender or a blender. That's your base. Now you can start adding things in. You can make a Greek fiesta version. You can make, a Mexican fiesta version or a Greek version or traditional ham and cheese, depending on what you want to mix in. Like a Mexican fiesta, you might want to mix a little bit of taco seasoning in with this egg base. Then you add a little bit of fried chorizo, all kinds of other little fun things that suit your particular flavors. And you put them in a little jelly jar. Screw the lid on the jar, spray them with a little cooking spray first so that they come out easier. Pour your mixture, put your mix-ins in, pour your mixture on top. Take a skewer or a butter knife and mix that up a little bit in the jars so that your egg mixture gets down inside the mix-ins. Put the lid on a little bit more than finger tight and put the jars right in the sous vide. And you can make a dozen of these in the sous vide at the same time. You will see some bubbles escape. Don't freak out. The bubbles, you want the bubbles to come out because the air on the inside is expanding and you want it to kind of bubble out. Don't worry, it's at equilibrium pressure with the water outside, so the water is not going to go back in. Take them using tongs because these things are going to be hot, and a kitchen towel on the counter. Pick your little jars out of the sous vide, take the lid off, do a quick test to see if they're set up enough to meet your desires. Usually takes about an hour. If you want them a little more set, screw the lids back on, put it back in, let it go a little bit longer. If you like the way it is, you can let them rest for a bit. You can refrigerate those that you're not going to eat, or you can eat them immediately. And trust me, they are amazing. But those are egg bites. They're wonderful. I'm afraid I kind of tore that up a little bit because I didn't put enough cooking spray on that one, but it still tasted great. Oh, by the way, Starbucks was selling these things for outrageous prices. We had a cook-off at the shop. We tested our version here against the Starbucks. Our version beat the Starbucks version hands down in every case. The Starbucks were bland, almost no flavor. These things were glorious, silky, custardy texture. Loved the flavor. And they cost about a third as much as one Starbucks bag, egg bite to make. So the weird. Okay, what if you're not going to cook in your sous vide? What else can you do with it? And yes, Gwen, you're absolutely right. We made a couple of dozen of these in the shop for a shop party. We ate about 10 of them that day. We put the rest of them in the freezer in order to reheat, or not the freezer, I'm sorry, the refrigerator. In order to reheat them, you take the lid off, put a little bit of plastic wrap over the top, and put it in the microwave for about 30 seconds. And you have egg in the morning. It's lovely. So what can you do with some of the weird things here with the sous vide? Well, it's basically a high precision bain-marie. This is what we're calling the double boiler. You can take a basin, you can float it on top of your water bath. You set your water bath at whatever temperature you want the ingredient in your basin to be. You don't have to worry about having the cooked ingredients in your basin curdle or coagulate or burn. And the ones that we had, Clinton, the ones we had in the fridge, they lasted a week easy. They probably would have lasted longer than that, but they never got the chance. We ate them all up. And I think, yes, and that is a bain-marie. I'm sorry, I'm not a French cook. I'm a hobbyist wolf. I never had any French lessons. What else can you do with it? Well, yes, you can heat sake for those who love their Japanese rice wines and liqueurs. Yes, if you like warmed sake, you can set your sous vide at the just perfect sake temperature and put your bottles right in it. There is a Japanese green tea known as Gyokuro, and I've probably butchered the heck out of that. But it's a tea that is brewed at very low temperatures. It's very difficult to brew with most tea brewers and stuff because none of them get down that low. Well, that's easily in the range of your sous vide. So you put your green tea in a little canning jar, a mason jar. You put your green tea in there with your filtered water, screw the lid on, and set it down in your sous vide. Let it come up to temperature for about 2 to 4 minutes. You have Gyokuro tea, and I probably just butchered it again. Cold brew coffee quickly. A lot of people love that cold brew, but in order to make it, you generally have to sit it in the refrigerator overnight or for days. Well, how about if you could make cold brew concentrate in 2 hours? Take your cold brew, a half a cup to a 3/4 cup of coarse ground coffee with 4 cups of water. Put it in either a jar or a zip bag. Get all the air out, put it in your sous vide at 150 degrees for 2 hours, and then filter it out. Cold brew concentrate 2 hours later. For those that are living in cold climates and have a hard time proofing doughs because it never gets warm enough in their kitchen for the doughs to ride properly, well, put it in a covered basin and float it on a lukewarm bath in the sous vide. If you've had honey that's set in the cabinet for too long and you've got those crystals that are in the bottom of your honey and you would like to use the honey because it hasn't gone bad, it's just crystallized and you can't get it out of the container. Set your sous vide between 105 and 120 degrees, put your honey jar in it. It'll melt those crystals back into honey. It'll be perfectly usable. Here's a neat trick. A couple of good apples like the Branberry or the Golden Delicious have lovely flavors for apple pies, but their texture is very soft. And when you bake pies with them, they tend to turn to mush. They don't get the nice apple slices you do like with a Granny Smith. Well, what's happening is the pectin in those apples is kind of denaturing under the high heat. What if you could stabilize those pectins before you applied high heat? You can put those sliced apples in the sous vide at 155 degrees for 1 hour. The pectin will stabilize at that temperature. You take them out and you put them in the pie, and when you bake them at the higher temperature, they don't soften and degrade. They will remain intact. So now you have the flavor of those apples with the texture of the others. Great techniques. We talked about infusing alcohols. You can also infuse coconut oil for body lotions. You can brew beer in a bag in sous vide. Now, I know nothing about brewing, so we might want to talk with Nero about this. But apparently, this is a brewer's technique that works very well. For those with infants or those that are taking care of livestock or baby kittens and puppies, zoo animals, those types of things, bringing mother's milk to body heat can be done easily and safely in a sous vide. Blooming yeast, yes, Clinton blooming yeast in a sous vide as well. How about those that love the spa treatment with spa waxes and massage oils, or those heated stones that they put on your back during a massage session? You can bring those to just the right temperatures by putting their containers in a sous vide at the right settings. So you have a lot of unusual uses in addition to cooking. And I hope this has given you some idea of things that you can do with a sous vide machine. If we have any other questions, please feel free to chime in. I'm sure Alana and I will be more than happy to answer any of the questions that you might have. Thank you, one and all. I'm afraid I ran a little bit over time, but I hope I didn't bore anybody to tears. Thank you once again. You can find me on Fur Affinity. I'd be happy to answer questions there as well. My handle there is the same as here as Verger. And Elan is out there too. And Elan, thank you. Thank you so much for being my co-host and hosting the panel with me. I appreciate your time and your expertise.
Well, you're quite welcome. I didn't have to do too much with it there, but I was here to help with the questions and talk a lot as well. You did all the work, so thank you for hosting such a wonderful panel.
You're very welcome, and thank everybody for attending the panel. I hope you're having a great time here at Megaplex Online, and hopefully, if we're doing this in person next year down in Orlando, I intend to apply for panel time, and we can do this all again down there to refresh your memories and maybe introduce a few new recipes and concepts while we're at it. Clinton, I don't know if I see that the recording light is red, which means this is turned on. Moderator Yoshi, will these be available later as recordings for the world to potentially play this back? Outstanding. Well, I will be looking forward to that because I'm sure there are a lot of people that are going to be interested. And we did dump a lot of information out there all at once. So folks might want to go back and review certain parts of it, write down some notes, and think of questions to come back and ask the next time. Absolutely, Clinton. I'm sure if they've recorded this one, I know I saw the red light on in the beginning session too. So once we find the question, once we find the answer, I'll be putting it out on my Twitter account and on my FA account and other places so that those that were interested but were unable to attend, or those that attended and just would like to see it again, can get the information. Thank you all once again.